It was a warm afternoon in the bustling streets of Los Angeles, where people hurried along with their lives. The city's chaos and charm intertwined in a way that made it feel alive, breathing with every step its inhabitants took. On the corner of a busy avenue, outside a popular cafe, Kevin Hart, the celebrated comedian and actor, was enjoying a quiet moment alone. He sat at a table on the patio, sipping his iced coffee, watching the people pass by. The sun had just begun its descent, casting long shadows on the pavement, signaling the arrival of evening. Kevin's life had always been in the spotlight. For years, he had built a reputation as one of the hardest-working comedians in Hollywood, his rapid-fire humor and infectious energy making him a household name. Yet, in these brief moments of solitude, when the city hummed in the background and he could hear his own thoughts, he often felt a strange sense of detachment. Fame came with its own set of pressures, and sometimes even a man like Kevin needed a break from it all. It was during this rare moment of calm that the interruption came. A tall, broad-shouldered man, maybe in his early 40s, approached Kevin's table. His appearance was unremarkable, average height, wearing a plain jacket and jeans, with a look of determination in his eyes. His name was Jack. He had the kind of face that wouldn't stand out in a crowd, but something about his demeanor made him seem a bit different, perhaps restless, as if he was on the brink of something important. Or perhaps something dangerous. "Hey," Jack said, his voice gruff and direct, as he stood before Kevin. "You're Kevin Hart, right?" Kevin looked up, offering a friendly smile, always eager to meet a fan. "Yeah, that's me. How's it going?" Jack didn't smile back. Instead, he crossed his arms and leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing. "I gotta say, man, you're a pretty bad actor." Kevin blinked, taken aback. He was used to playful jabs, even criticisms, but this was different. There was something harsh about the way Jack said it. Something more personal, more cutting. "I'm sorry," Kevin asked, his tone trying to remain light, but the flicker of confusion was evident. "I mean it," Jack continued, ignoring the discomfort in Kevin's eyes. "I've watched your movies, your stand-up specials. You're not funny. You're not even a good actor. People just laugh because you're famous. It's all just noise." The words hit Kevin harder than he expected. It wasn't the first time someone had criticized his work, but the way Jack spoke, with such venom, caught him off guard. The surrounding noise of the city seemed to fade as Kevin sat up straighter, searching Jack's face for some sign of a joke or an explanation. "Look," Kevin said, trying to keep his cool, "everyone's entitled to their opinion. But why are you telling me this? If you don't like my work, that's fine, but there's no need to be rude about it." Jack's expression hardened. "You don't get it, do you? You're a sellout. People like you don't even care about the craft. It's all just about making money, about getting people to buy into your image. It's the same with every actor in this town, it's all fake. You think you're funny because people laugh at you, but it's just noise. You're just a joke in a world full of jokes." Kevin felt a flicker of anger rise in him, but he was used to dealing with this sort of confrontation. He had grown up on the streets, had been the butt of countless jokes, and had fought to get to where he was. But something about Jack's words struck a nerve. Maybe it was the fact that Jack didn't even seem to know him, didn't understand the years of struggle, the hustle, the work Kevin had put into his career. Or maybe it was because, deep down, a part of Kevin did wonder if he had ever truly proved himself, if the laughter he got was ever truly genuine. "You have no idea what it takes to get here," Kevin said, his voice steady, but his fists clenched beneath the table. "I didn't just show up and get handed a career. I worked my ass off for everything I've got. And yeah, I may not be everyone's cup of tea, but I'm not here to make everyone happy. I'm here to do what I love." Jack's gaze softened for a moment, and for a brief second, Kevin thought he might be able to reach him. But then, the anger returned to Jack's eyes. "That's the problem," Jack said bitterly. "You think you're doing what you love, but you're just playing a role. You're just pretending to be something you're not. And people buy into it because they want to believe it. It's all a lie. Kevin stared at him for a long moment, the words echoing in his mind. There was something raw about Jack's anger, something deeply personal in his attack. He had to admit, there was a part of him that wondered if Jack was right. After all, Hollywood had a way of distorting reality. The fame, the glamour, the money, it all made it easy to forget who you really were. But Kevin wasn't about to let some random guy tear down everything he had worked for. Not today. Not in front of everyone at this cafe. I don't know what you're trying to prove, Kevin said, his voice rising slightly. But I don't need to explain myself to you. I know who I am and what I stand for. And if you think what I'm doing is fake, then that's your problem. Not mine. Jack's expression twisted, as if he was about to say something else. But before he could, Kevin stood up, pushing his chair back with a sharp motion. He had enough. He wasn't going to let this man ruin his afternoon, or his belief in his work. As he turned to leave, Jack's voice followed him. You'll see one day, he said quietly. One day, you'll understand what I mean. Kevin didn't turn around. He just walked away, his mind racing. What did Jack mean? What did he know that Kevin didn't? But as Kevin made his way down the street, he couldn't shake the feeling that the confrontation had just begun. The man had left something behind, something unsettling, something that would haunt Kevin's thoughts for days to come. And little did Kevin know, Jack's words weren't just a passing insult. They were the beginning of a much deeper unraveling, one that would shake the foundations of everything Kevin thought he knew about himself, his career, and the world around him. The streets of Los Angeles were bustling as usual, but Kevin couldn't shake the weight of his encounter with Jack. His steps felt heavier as he walked down the sidewalk, the harsh words still echoing in his mind. It wasn't the first time someone had criticized him. In fact, he'd been the target of harsh criticism for much of his career. But there was something about Jack's words that gnawed at him, something that went beyond the typical online troll or disgruntled critic. As he rounded the corner to his car, Kevin's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. A text from his manager, Derek, popped up. Hey, we've got a big meeting with Netflix in an hour. You good? Kevin sighed and typed back, yeah, just a rough day. He didn't feel like explaining. His mind was still preoccupied with Jack. He didn't need more questions right now. Just work. Just the usual distractions that would make the day feel like it had a purpose. Kevin arrived at the office, but his thoughts remained far from the pitch meeting. As Derek went over the details of the presentation, Kevin's mind kept drifting back to the cafe. Why had Jack singled him out like that? What did he mean by, you're just playing a role? Kevin had heard all kinds of feedback throughout his career, but this felt different. Personal. Like Jack had hit on something real, something Kevin himself had been quietly wrestling with for years. The meeting itself passed in a blur. Kevin went through the motions, nodding at the right moments, offering the occasional witty remark. But his usual confidence was nowhere to be found. The Netflix executives seemed engaged, but Kevin could barely focus on the words coming out of his own mouth. The thought of Jack's accusations lingered like a fog in his mind. Later that evening, Kevin found himself in his apartment, pacing around as he tried to shake off the lingering discomfort. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, then another, hoping the burn would quiet the storm in his chest. But it didn't. The thing that haunted him wasn't Jack's insult. It wasn't even the possibility that Jack might be right. What bothered Kevin was the realization that Jack had seen something in him that he hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Was his success truly the result of just playing a role? Was he really just a product of the system, a person shaped by the very forces that seemed to define Hollywood? As the night wore on, Kevin found himself increasingly agitated. His career had always been built on his ability to make people laugh, to make them forget their troubles for a few minutes. But was it enough? He had reached the heights of fame, yes, but at what cost? He had always joked about how he had hustled to get to the top, but did that hustle actually mean something? Or was it all just noise? Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Kevin opened it to find his close friend, Jamal, standing in the hallway. Jamal was the one person Kevin could always count on to put things into perspective, to remind him of who he was when he got lost in the swirl of fame and expectations. "You good, man?" Jamal asked, stepping inside. "I can tell something's off." Kevin motioned for Jamal to sit, then flopped down on the couch beside him. "I don't know, man. I met this guy earlier today, this guy, Jack, and he said some things that stuck with me." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "What did he say?" Kevin took a deep breath, then recounted the conversation, feeling the weight of Jack's words all over again. By the time he finished, Jamal was quiet, digesting the information. "I get where you're coming from, Kev," Jamal finally said. "People like to talk shit, especially in your industry. But maybe there's something to what he said. Not that you're a bad actor or anything, but maybe you've been trying so hard to keep up with this persona that you forgot what really matters." Kevin's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Jamal continued, "maybe you're so focused on being the Kevin Hart people expect that you've lost touch with who you really are. The guy who made people laugh when he was struggling. The guy who had real stories to tell. Maybe the role you're playing is keeping you from doing the things you really want to do. Maybe you're not just a product of Hollywood, but you've allowed Hollywood to turn you into one." Kevin stared at Jamal for a long time, processing his words. He had always prided himself on being authentic, on staying true to his roots. But somewhere along the way, it had gotten harder to differentiate between the man he was and the character he had built for the world. Was he still Kevin Hart, or was he simply a brand? Jamal stood up, giving Kevin a knowing look. "You don't need to listen to what that guy said, but it's worth asking yourself, are you living for the applause, or are you living for yourself?" Kevin didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out the window, watching the lights of the city flicker in the distance. It felt like the world was moving forward without him, like he was stuck in a loop of expectations and rehearsed smiles. Was he ready to break out of it? The answer, as he would soon discover, wasn't simple. As Kevin lay in bed that night, the questions continued to swirl in his mind. The confrontation with Jack was far from over. It had only just begun. Kevin's journey to reconcile who he had become with who he truly was would take him places he never expected, forcing him to confront the truth about his life, his career, and his very identity. Little did he know, Jack wasn't done with him either. The man who had shaken his world with just a few words had his own reasons for wanting to challenge Kevin's image. And the deeper they both delved into this unexpected clash, the more their paths would intertwine in ways neither could have foreseen. The next chapter would bring unexpected revelations and test the limits of both men, pushing them toward a truth they weren't prepared to face. The days following his encounter with Jack were a blur of conflicting emotions. Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him was slowly unraveling. The laughter, the applause, the red carpets, it all seemed like a mask, something he had worn for so long that he no longer remembered what his true face looked like. The morning after Jamal's visit, Kevin found himself at the gym, a place where he usually went to clear his head. But even here, amid the clanking of weights and the rhythmic sound of his sneakers on the treadmill, his mind refused to settle. Every time he looked at his reflection in the gym's mirrors, all he saw was a man playing a role. A man who had been wearing a mask for so long that he no longer knew what it felt like to be real. As Kevin finished his workout, his phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. It was a reminder about an interview he had scheduled for later that day. Normally, he would have been excited about the opportunity to promote his latest project, but today, he just felt tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of playing the same character. He couldn't stop thinking about Jack's words. "You're just playing a role." The words echoed in his mind, louder than any critic or hater ever could. Jack didn't just attack his work, He attacked his identity. And it hit harder than anything Kevin had faced in his career. Still, he pushed forward. He had an interview to do, and Kevin Hart was a professional. He could play the game. He could fake it, just like he had done for years. The interview took place at a swanky downtown studio, with sleek, modern decor and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Kevin sat across from a well-groomed talk show host, a man named Charles, who had been interviewing celebrities for years. Charles was known for his smooth, easygoing style, always asking the questions that put stars at ease. But today, Kevin wasn't feeling at ease. He forced a smile as the cameras rolled, the familiar spotlight casting its glow on him, but inside, he felt distant, detached. "So Kevin," Charles began, "you've been on quite a roll lately. Big movies, sold-out shows, your social media following just keeps growing. What's next for the Kevin Hart brand?" Kevin took a deep breath, shifting in his seat. He was used to these questions. This was his life, after all. But now they felt hollow. What was next? What could possibly come next when the very foundation of his existence felt so fragile? "Well," Kevin started, forcing his usual enthusiasm into his voice, "I've been working on a few things. Some new projects, some collaborations. It's all about growth, you know? You keep pushing, keep hustling, keep going." Charles nodded, smiling as if he had heard this answer 1,000 times before. But he wasn't finished. "I know you've had some criticisms lately, people saying that you've changed. That you're not the same Kevin Hart from your stand-up days. How do you respond to that?" Charles asked, his tone casual, almost too casual. It was as if he were probing for something deeper, something personal. Kevin hesitated. The question struck a nerve. "You've changed." It was a phrase he had heard countless times over the years. But now, for the first time, it didn't feel like just another criticism. It felt like the truth. "I think people change," Kevin said slowly, his voice quieter than usual. "I've changed, yeah, but I think change is a part of growing. It's about evolving, adapting to new circumstances. I'm not the same guy I was when I first started, but that's not a bad thing. It's growth." But even as he said the words, Kevin knew they weren't entirely true. He wasn't just evolving, he was running from something. Running from the truth. Later that evening, Kevin sat alone in his apartment, the TV still on, but the sound muted. His phone buzzed again. It was a text from Jamal. "You still thinking about that guy, huh?" Kevin typed back, "Yeah. Something's not sitting right with me." Jamal responded almost immediately, "Maybe you need to stop thinking and start doing. Change your pace, you know? Don't just keep running the same script. It's time to rewrite the story." Kevin sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. Jamal was right. It was time to rewrite the story. But how? Where did he even begin? That night, he couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his bed, the same thoughts swirling in his mind like a storm. He knew he couldn't go on like this. He couldn't keep playing the game. But stepping away from everything, from the fame, the brand, the identity he had built for himself, it was terrifying. He had spent years building it all up. Could he really tear it down? As the clock ticked on, Kevin's phone rang. It was an unknown number, but he answered it anyway, his gut telling him something important was about to happen. "Hello," Kevin said, his voice groggy from lack of sleep. "Kevin Hart." A voice on the other end asked, sharp and direct. "Yeah, who's this?" "This is Jack," the voice said. "We need to talk." The sudden call from Jack took Kevin by surprise. How had Jack gotten his number? And why was he calling now, after all this time? Kevin's pulse quickened, a mix of curiosity and unease rising in his chest. "I'm listening," Kevin said, his voice steady but guarded. Jack's voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation," he said. "And I think it's time you hear the truth." Kevin leaned forward, his heart racing. "The truth? What truth?" "You think I just came up to you and criticized you out of nowhere?" Jack continued. I've been watching you for years, Kevin. I know exactly what's going on. You've been hiding behind a persona, but you're not the only one. And the thing is, you're not the first person to get lost in the system. But if you really want to understand what's at stake here, you need to stop running. Stop hiding. And meet me. Kevin felt his breath catch in his throat. The invitation was mysterious, and the tone in Jack's voice sent a chill down his spine. Where? Kevin asked, his curiosity piqued despite himself. Jack paused before answering. I'll send you the details. Just don't back out. This is your chance to finally see things for what they really are. The next morning, Kevin received a text with an address. It was a secluded location on the outskirts of the city, a warehouse. The kind of place that didn't exactly scream comforting. Kevin didn't know what to expect, but he knew one thing for sure. This was the moment. This was the confrontation that would force him to face the truth about Jack, about his career, and about himself. As Kevin drove to the location, a part of him hoped this would be the closure he needed. But another part of him feared it would open a door to something far darker than he was ready to handle. What would Jack reveal? And would Kevin be ready to face it? Kevin's grip tightened around the steering wheel as he approached the warehouse. The building loomed ahead, an industrial structure that seemed out of place in the otherwise lively cityscape. Its gray, weathered exterior contrasted sharply with the polished Hollywood life Kevin had built for himself. The irony wasn't lost on him. This was the place he had come to face his truth, and yet everything about it felt like a reminder of how far removed he was from the man he once was. He parked his car and sat there for a moment, staring at the warehouse. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to drive away, to pretend he hadn't received the mysterious message. But there was no turning back now. Jack had left him no choice. With a deep breath, Kevin stepped out of the car, the cool evening air hitting his face. He looked around. No one was in sight. The area was deserted. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of the warehouse's metal doors. Kevin felt the weight of the night pressing down on him as he made his way to the entrance. As he approached, the doors creaked open on their own, as though they had been waiting for him. Jack's voice echoed from somewhere deep inside the cavernous space. "Come in, Kevin," he called. The tone was calm, but there was an edge to it, a kind of urgency that made Kevin's skin crawl. "I'm not going to bite. Yet." Kevin stepped inside, his footsteps echoing through the vast, empty space. His heart beat louder than his feet, and he could feel the tension building with each step. He didn't know what to expect, but the uneasy feeling in his gut told him this wasn't going to be easy. The warehouse was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the floor. In the far corner, Kevin could make out a figure sitting on an old crate. Jack. As Kevin approached, Jack stood up, his expression unreadable. He was dressed simply, almost like a man who didn't care about appearances, jeans, a hoodie, and worn-out sneakers. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing that screamed star. And yet, there was something about his presence that commanded attention, something that made Kevin feel small, insignificant. "So you came," Jack said, his voice calm. "That's good. I knew you would. You're not a coward, Kevin. But you're lost. And that's why we're here." Kevin swallowed hard, but didn't speak. He was afraid if he opened his mouth, he might start asking questions he wasn't ready to hear the answers to. "You've spent your entire career running a race that wasn't meant for you," Jack continued, his gaze piercing. "You've been chasing the spotlight, the money, the fame. But all of it's just smoke and mirrors. You've been playing a role. No, you've been performing your entire life. And now you're trapped in it. You're stuck in this character you built, this brand, this illusion. And you can't escape." Kevin's stomach tightened. He had been afraid of this. But hearing it from Jack, hearing the truth laid bare in such an uncompromising way, made him feel vulnerable, exposed. "How do you know all this?" Kevin finally found his voice. "Who the hell are you to judge me?" Jack smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You think I don't know what it's like? I'm just like you, Kevin. I was just like you, chasing the same hollow dreams. But I woke up. And you will, too. The question is, how much longer will you keep pretending? Kevin's chest tightened, the words cutting deep. Jack was right, wasn't he? In his relentless pursuit of success, Kevin had forgotten what it felt like to just be himself. He had buried his true self beneath the armor of fame and success, hiding behind jokes and performances, never stopping to think about who he really was. And now, standing in this abandoned warehouse, Kevin realized that all the applause and accolades didn't mean a thing if they didn't align with his own truth. For the first time in years, Kevin felt the weight of his own vulnerability. I don't know who I am anymore, he admitted, his voice quieter now. I don't know what I'm doing. Jack's eyes softened, just for a moment. That's the first step, Kevin. Admitting it. You're not alone in this. We're all lost, in one way or another. But it's not too late. You still have time. Kevin looked at Jack, unsure of what to say. The weight of the truth was suffocating, but it was also liberating. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he could breathe again. So, what now? Kevin asked, his voice shaky. What do I do? Jack's face hardened again, but this time with resolve. You stop running. You take a step back, and you rebuild. Not just your career, but your life. This world, this system, it's all designed to make you forget who you are. But if you want to truly find yourself, you've got to break free. You've got to do something real. Something that matters. Kevin's mind raced. He had always thought his worth was tied to his success, to the next project, the next paycheck. But now, he was beginning to understand that real success wasn't about numbers or recognition. It was about being true to himself, being authentic, and doing something that meant something. Not for the world, but for him. Jack stepped closer, placing a hand on Kevin's shoulder. You've got the power to change your story, Kevin. Don't let it be written for you. Don't let the world decide who you are. Kevin nodded slowly, the weight of Jack's words settling in. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be smooth. But for the first time in years, Kevin felt ready to face the uncertainty, to rewrite his story on his own terms. As Jack turned to leave, he paused and looked back at Kevin. Just remember, it's not about perfection. It's about finding peace. And once you do that, everything else will fall into place. Kevin stood there for a long moment, watching Jack disappear into the shadows of the warehouse. The door clicked shut behind him, and Kevin was left alone with his thoughts. He had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Something real. The truth was, Kevin Hart had spent years playing a role. But now, it was time for him to step off the stage and find his own voice. And this time, it was going to be his own.